presentation? All right, there we go. All right. Okay, well, thanks, Rachel, for kicking that off, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. So one of the things I want to do is take you through a very brief kind of overview of what we've been up to the last year. A lot of you on the call know what we've been up to because you've been helping us do it. But for those of you who are new, or for those of you who are guests that don't really know much about what Sustainable Braintree does, I find this very helpful, just kind of a way to kind of look back on the year that we've done. We've actually done a lot this year, and I think we, as an organization, have a lot to be proud of, and I want to share that because I think it's a good thing to share. So we really started out this year with our first steering committee meeting, virtual again, due to COVID. And we started the meeting out thinking, well, maybe eventually, we'll start getting, steering committee meetings that aren't virtual, but we never actually did that, partially because of COVID, but also partially because it's just so convenient to, to be Zooming from home as opposed to setting up a meeting at the library and having to get over there and all that kind of stuff. So our first two steering committee meetings happened on April 1st, Perkins Park Community Garden, which we manage, and Suzanne Brothers is going to talk a little bit about. They had the opening day for Perkins Park. And really kind of, it started out as a surprise at the beginning of the year because we weren't really sure what was happening with it, but Braintree did finally get its green community designation. And that was announced on Earth Day by the DOER. So that was really cool. And then later on in April, we submitted a letter of support, which we do, several times a year. This one happened to be for Smith Beach Green Infrastructure Project happening with some state funding. Into May, we really kind of got into some of the virtual presentations that we did this year. So we had a virtual presentation by our own Louise Quigley on native plants and gardening. And then Watson Park letter of support we did for resiliency improvement that I think has started construction, coastal resiliency measures. We had another steering committee meeting, and then in June we awarded our annual scholarship to BHS senior Sophia Milholland. June 16th, we kicked off our grandfather tree photo contest, and this was a contest to find the oldest trees in Braintree. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit about that, to summarize that in a couple of slides. And we had another steering committee meeting. I think might be a duplicate here. Yeah. In July 24th, we had a virtual presentation, and it was a sea turtle hospital tour. The New England Aquarium Sea Turtle Hospital over in Quincy. So that was really good and well attended. And then we had another steering committee meeting. And unfortunately, on September 18th, we eventually, along with the Historical Society, decided to cancel our farm to table dinner, unfortunately. And that was just due to, Delta variant was starting to ramp up, and we're kind of concerned about all that. We did do a nice outdoor tour of the Smelt Brook, led by Robert Kearns, talked about local watershed and all the improvement projects into getting the smelts back upstream so they could spawn where they're supposed to, and getting rid of some of the impediments that have been put up over the last couple hundred years. And then finally, here we are on December 9th at our annual meeting, and about to have a great presentation by Mass Climate Action Network. And a couple of things I want to just pull out here. And Suzanne, in one slide, I'm going to ask you to cover the garden. But one thing that happened over the summer that was really cool was the grandfather tree contest, and we had three winners. Jeff Medeiros kind of organized this, and then there was a winner picked for each month. And so the first month's winner was Paula Rivera, the second month's winner was Wendy Lamb, and the third was Donna Anderson. And so a lot of people submitted pictures of trees. The reason why we did this is we wanted to, just kind of raise awareness of people's relationship with nature. And trees are a great way to do that. And I can't remember if it was part of the contest rules, but everyone submitted pictures of themselves with the trees, which I think is, really kind of shows how connected people are with nature. So I thought that was really cool. And here's a map of where the largest of those trees actually happen to show up in town. So we have a thought to do some other photo contests in the next summer. maybe about native plants and the like, but so some good stuff came out of that. And congratulations again to the winners. Suzanne, you want to talk about the garden?
Sure, thanks. This was our 12th season under the umbrella of Sustainable Braintree, and we had what I'll call a modified season. We had access to our plots, shed, tools, and water right from the start of the season in April, but we held off on having any big gatherings, especially in summer and early fall when we typically have a big picnic. But we were able to have mini work parties, and in this photo on the left, we had about 10 to 15 gardeners come for a mini work party, spend the afternoon with us. And in about 2 hours, we had the garden, I call it, put back together again, both in terms of all of the chores we were able to get done, but also finally being able to be back together again for the first time in 2 years. Looking ahead to next season, you look at the photo on the right, one of the issues that we need to deal with is shade. We're 12 years older, and so are all the trees around us, which is good and bad. In this photo, you can see where the sunshine is. We had a tree that came down last October in that weird Halloween snowstorm we had, which brought us some extra sunshine. We're not looking to take down trees, but we would like to see if we could get some branches thinned out, especially on our non-native species. And that would make a big difference for us, especially in the late summer, early fall when the sun doesn't get very high. Mike, do you have that next slide or, oh, okay. I'm gonna get up on my gardening soapbox for just a minute. I won't take too long, but I want to let you know about a few gardening topics on this slide that are probably important to you whether you garden or not. I'll mention them briefly, and then if you want to find more information about them, you can take a look at our link tree, which is down there in the bottom in the green strip, links to more information. And actually, the first thing that I want to say isn't even on the slide because I just got information about it a day or two ago. There is a long-awaited hearing on pesticide reform coming up on take a look at that link. The pesticide reform in Massachusetts. One of those pieces of legislation, for example, is focused on banning toxic chemicals such as glyphosate on school and daycare properties. Second, there are 2 non-native species we need to be concerned about. This spotted lanternfly and jumping worm. I had a video of that jumping worm, which unfortunately didn't make it in here. But you could tell jumping worm because it, well, you could look at the picture there. There are some important differences between it and the earthworm that we're used to seeing. But if you poke a jumping worm, they thrash around and they kind of move around like a snake. They're pretty gross, and I was really unhappy to find them in my garden and lost a lot of sleep over it, but heard from other gardeners that they're pretty widespread now in our area. So it's unfortunate. We have to learn how to deal with them. They're pretty new to us, but they're here. So is the lanternfly. What you do not need to worry about is the murder hornet. So that's one good piece of news. The other thing I want to mention is that we have a number of at-risk pollinators here in eastern Massachusetts, including 2 bumblebee species. This, unfortunately, this little bumblebee that I found at the garden one day, which was not a common eastern bumblebee. I thought maybe it was an at-risk species, but I found out it was not. But if you want to learn how to help support wild bees, take a look at our link. I want to mention that honeybees are not at-risk species. So that's one reason why I won't be putting a honeybee hive in our community garden. And again, if you want to learn more about that and how to help save our native pollinators, take a look at our link tree. And also support pesticide reform. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. So yeah, and I think a few of those things that she mentioned, we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of what's coming up in 2022. So now without further ado, I'd like to, well, actually not without further ado, first we got to talk about Sustainable Braintree membership, right? Almost there. Next slide here. Okay, so for those of you who are not members of Sustainable Braintree, here's some information for you. So our membership is annual. And so if you want to be a member of Sustainable Braintree, it's an annual renewal membership. And right now it's kind of on you to renew it every year. Reasons why to become a member, to financially support our mission, our programs, and our operations, right? That should be pretty obvious. But also for this meeting, when we do the steering committee election at the end of the meeting, you will, if you are a member, you will get to vote in that steering committee election. And if you'd like to run for the steering committee, hopefully you've already let us know, but we do have a full slate of people running. But if there are folks who want to run as a write-in, we can also do that. That is something you can vote on only if you're a member. So in addition, members can also participate in our steering committee meetings, which I'll talk about the schedule of those meetings later on. And so in order to be a member, again, you need to pay dues as early as the first steering committee meeting, which is in January, or as late as this meeting. And on our website, you can find the membership levels, individual, family, corporate members. And to become a member, click on the link down there or put in that link or go to our website and go there. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up before Logan from Mass Climate Action Network spoke is because if you want to become a member in the next 45 minutes, you can do it while Logan does his presentation. But as soon as he's done, we're going to close the membership for the year. And so that way I can in the background check to see if we've got any new members, and then we can host our election and everything is good. And hopefully you can do that and pay close attention to our guest presenter, who is Logan Malik from the Mass Climate Action Network. So Logan, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much for the invitation to join your annual meeting. I'm very excited to talk with you all about this work that MCAN has been involved with around creating a MLP scorecard and Braintree and Beld's performance in that scorecard, as well as some of the takeaways and some of the next steps that we see as moving forward, because the scorecard is great, but it's really more about how can we move forward collectively and cooperatively. So I'm really excited to be with you all tonight. Before I get into anything, I just want to go through my agenda and what I'm gonna go through. First, I'm just going to do a brief summary of MCAN and what we are as an organization. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the context of climate advocacy and policy within municipal light plants and across the Commonwealth. I'm then going to talk about this big study scorecard that MCAN has been working on for the past year now, and we put out in September. I'll talk about our analysis and what we kind of did, how we went about scoring municipal light plants. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Beld's performance in the scorecard, kind of how they stacked up, just when looking at the metrics specifically. But I think the majority of my presentation is really going to be about examining some key conclusions that we found. We found 7 key conclusions, and just talking about how those apply to you all in Braintree. And I do have quite a few slides, so hopefully I'll be able to get through them in time. But as Rachel said, if you have questions, I am more than happy to answer them at the end of my presentation. So with that being said, I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about MCAN. We are a nonprofit that was founded in 2000 with over 65 chapters now all across the state of the Commonwealth. And our role is really as a facilitator. And we really want to be a facilitator for municipal level action all across the state. We want to empower local chapters by enhancing communications, promoting town level projects and that improve communities, and decreasing climate causing pollution. And we're also unique in the sense that we are the only nonprofit organization that is really focused on municipal light plants. We believe that they are the preferred model, the preferred type of energy utility. And we see, because of the community-owned nature of them and the local aspect, we love working in these communities because there's, because BELD works for you all, not for their shareholders. And so that's really a focus of ours. Just to reiterate, it's all about local action for us. That's where we believe that the real power and effective advocacy comes from, and that's what we're all about supporting. And so with that, I'm going to kind of get into my presentation, and I'm going to start by talking about the context. And so in order to do that, I just want to go through a few climate policies, a few of the landmark key pieces of climate legislation that we've seen throughout the Commonwealth. And I want to also kind of talk about their relationship to municipal light plants. So first is the renewable portfolio standards. This was implemented way back in 2003, and it was one of the state's major climate policies that was implemented, specifically looking at curbing emissions. And what this policy essentially does is it requires electricity suppliers to obtain a percentage of their electricity from qualifying clean renewable facilities. And basically there's a percentage of the supplier's total supply that every single year they have to meet with clean renewable energy. And back in 2001 or 2003, this started at 1% renewable energy. And in 2019, it was 14%. Now we're at, in 2021, 18% of utilities in Massachusetts have to, 18% of the energy has to come from clean renewable sources. Now, as I'm seeing, and you'll see here, this does not apply to municipal light plants. And this is a common thing that we see throughout climate policy that has historically moved through the legislature. The same is true of the clean energy standard, which kind of adds to that renewable portfolio standard concept and kind of expands it. It does not apply to municipal light plants. The same thing is true of both the Energy Diversity Act, which was passed in 2016, and the Act to Advance Clean Energy in 2018, both of which were about requiring utilities to contract for offshore wind, to procure a set amount, 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind by a set date. And this, again, is not something that is required by municipal light plants. I want to also just go to the Global Warming Solutions Act. We think of this as kind of the pillar and a landmark bill. And this essentially established the first ever state emissions target, legally binding target of 80% reductions in emissions by 2050. And that applies, of course, to everyone. It was coupled with this piece of legislation called the Green Communities Act. And this was really meant to support the getting us to the Global Warming Solution Act target. And it kind of had, I would say, two key pieces. It was a big bill, but there are two key pieces I want to talk about right now. The first is it had this Green Communities program, which you all just became a part of and just joined, and huge kudos to you all. So as you know, municipal light plant communities, of course, can join this program. The other piece was energy efficiency. It really focused on establishing the program, the statewide program that we now call Mass Save. And this is also something that municipal light plants are not a part of. They don't get the funding that comes from the state for that. And similarly, they don't have to meet the requirements that investor-owned utilities, the national grids and Eversources do have to meet. So I think the main message that I'm trying to get across here in this slide is that in many ways, when we think about statewide action, municipal light plants have not been required. They have not been regulated in the same way as investor-owned utilities. And that can have some huge benefits because it increases flexibility. It allows the community to decide for themselves how they want to move forward. It also means that when we think about, the standards that we want to set in our Commonwealth, some MLPs might not be meeting that standard that we would expect from investor-owned utilities. Now, things have kind of changed with this landmark climate bill that we passed in 2021, the Next Generation Climate Bill. And this was a landmark historic bill for numerous reasons. It improved upon the Global Warming Solutions Act by updating the target. So as a state, we're required to have a target of net zero by 2050. That's the legally required standard now. It also implements sector-specific targets. That's very, very important when we think about how we get there. For us, something that we really were excited to see it enables the Department of Energy Resources to adopt something called a net zero stretch code, which is hugely important when we think about emissions from our buildings. And then most important for this discussion, it also establishes a greenhouse gas emission standards for municipal light plants. And this is really the first time that there has been a specific requirement by the state for municipal light plants to hit X percentage of non-emitting energy by certain periods of time. And as you can see, the goal is, and the requirement is that municipal light plants are powered by 50% non-emitting energy by 2030, by 75% non-emitting energy by 2040, and then net zero. So they're, have to meet the same goal as investor-owned utilities by 2050. This is absolutely progress from our perspective and something that we were very, very excited to see. We know a lot of MLPs worked on developing this. And I do just want to make it clear that this greenhouse gas emission standard, while it is similar and it gets us to the same goal and the same idea of having X percentage clean and renewable energy, it's different because of it allows for more types of energy to be considered non-emitting. So it's more about non-emitting energy and less about clean energy, that is established in the renewable portfolio standard. So you think about this includes your wind, solar, and those resources. It also includes nuclear energy, efficient gas energy. So it's a little bit different. Nonetheless, immense progress and really exciting landmark legislation that we saw. So despite that, and in the context of this, while there is this new standards, there is still a lot of flexibility for MLPs about thinking about how they get there and what programs they want to have in place and and how exactly they go about serving their community and transitioning to a clean, just energy future. And so because of that, we felt that it is important that we're looking at the progress that municipal light plants are making in various different areas, and that we're assessing and understanding the state of municipal light plants across the Commonwealth. And that's exactly what we tried to do with this 2021 scorecard. What's the score is what we're asking. And this is the second iteration of the scorecard. The first one came out in 2019, and in many ways it was a rapid assessment. Looking at MLPs and evaluating them. This scorecard drastically expands on that previous assessment, both in the level of detail and information that it provides, as well as in the intensity of our data collection process and our methods. And so what we did in this is we evaluated municipal light plants across 4 key categories. The first was energy transition, which was made up for 50 points. The second was energy efficiency, which made up for 25 points. The third was transparency and community engagement. And the final one was something that we call municipal policy context. And this kind of reflects the municipal light plants and the local government's efforts to create a policy context that facilitates the transition to a clean energy future. It makes it easier to do that, such as having a plan in place and opting into various different statewide programs that are available to towns and municipal light plants. And so if you couldn't see it from that graph, you'll be able to see that the scoring was from 0 to 100, too long. I just want to make a few comments. Number one, we saw a wide variety of scores across municipal light plants. The average score was around 45 points, and the median score was around 40 points. And we made very clear, we didn't want to categorize, there was no score that was, indicated that an MLP was succeeding or an MLP was not succeeding. This is really just a snapshot. And it's hoping, the goal is to provide a comparative picture across municipal light plants based on the metrics that we scored. And excuse me. So if you weren't able to see it on that, the results showed that Braintree ranked 5th of the 40 municipal light plants that were assessed in the scorecard. And they received also they got that rank by receiving 69 points, which is well above the average. When we look at, we kind of break down the categories. This just shows you the first one is energy transition. The second is energy efficiency. The third shows transparency and community engagement. And the fourth shows the MLP policy context. And I will just say, especially in energy transition, Braintree scored very, very well. And, it's very clear that there's a lot of really good work going on in your community and at your MLP. And it's very exciting for us to see that. No matter if you scored in the 98, in the hundreds or the 20s, it doesn't mean that we stop as far as the progress. It means that there is still work to be done, even if an MLP scored 100 points. And so that's really what I want you all to take from the scores, is that this is a snapshot based on what MCAN measured. It's all about where we go from here and how we continue to work together to make progress. And for us, that is really the goal and the purpose of this scorecard. The scores are great, but really what matters are the key conclusions that we drew, and then the recommendations that came from them. And the recommendations, I do just want to preface before I get into them, it's a list of suggestions about how we can continue to build upon the great work that has already been done. Every community is different. It's probable that no community can adopt every single recommendation, but we wanted to take the information that we found and say, okay, how can we move forward? What could be the next steps that Braintree or Marblehead, you name it, take to continue to build on their progress? And so that's what I'm going to talk about now. I'm going to list out the 7 key conclusions that MCAN found, and I'm going to specifically try to show you how those conclusions relate to Braintree and to the performance, and then kind of based on where Braintree is at, what are the next steps that could be taken in your community. And so with that, I am going to jump into the first conclusion that we had, and that is that while much remains to be done to transition MLPs to a clean, just energy future, there are several MLPs that are demonstrating real leadership and ambition in the energy transition and in energy efficiency efforts. And this is relative both to other municipal light plants as well as to investor-owned utilities across the state. And I think for us, these leaders are real proof that MLP's unique structure as community-based nonprofit utilities can serve as an important asset in mitigating climate change when things like clean energy and energy efficiency are prioritized. And in many ways, Braintree Electric is a leader. And that's based on the score. It's based on what we saw. There were several initiatives and several markers that we were very impressed with coming out of Braintree, and very excited to see. And it doesn't mean that the work stops here, but I think that there is a lot to be celebrated coming out of your community. The second conclusion is a little bit longer, so bear with me. But we observed that many municipal light plants have yet to recognize the importance of Class 1 renewable energy credit retirement. And so what is a REC? I am going to give you a brief overview, and if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them, and we have some other resources available to describe them. But as you may know, a utility's renewable energy percentage is determined by the ownership and retirement of something called Class 1 renewable energy credits, or other renewable energy credits that are not Class 1. RECs represent the positive environmental attributes associated with certain types of energy production. And so one REC is created each time a clean energy source generates 1 megawatt hour of electricity. And so in order for it to be a Class 1 REC, it has to be it has to come from facilities that are newer and that generate clean, what the state has designated as clean energy. So that you're talking about wind, solar, geothermal, and there are a few other sources. But it's really, it's kind of the cream of the crop. That's the best, cleanest energy, and that's the Class 1 RECs. And so the way that we account for the generation of clean energy in our system across the state and across the Northeast is through the creation of RECs. And where things get tricky is that RECs can actually be decoupled from energy, from the electrons that go into your home. These things can be decoupled. And so when they're decoupled, that means that a utility could use a megawatt hour of energy from wind, from a wind turbine, but then they would sell the REC, and that means essentially that the positive environmental attribute, the fact that this is coming from a clean energy source can no longer be counted in the utility's energy mix because someone else has taken it, and someone else, like an investor-owned utility, is taking credit for that renewable, environmentally sustainable characteristic of a facility. And so the reason why we care about REC retirement is that if municipal light plants don't retire their Class 1 RECs, that means that there's essentially no clean energy that they can take credit for in their energy mix. There might be non-emitting energy, which is a different type of REC, but they can't take credit for that clean generation because it goes to someone else. And if they're not retiring RECs, then that means that as a state, we are not transitioning at a pace that we kind of expect to with the policies that we have set for the Commonwealth, with the renewable portfolio standards, which we see as so critical across the Commonwealth. And I think the other piece is MLPs are generally not meeting the renewable portfolio standards as well. They're not required to, but it's something that we see as hugely beneficial and as something that municipal light plants should and could strive for. Now, I want to say Braintree is leading in this area. With the exception of Concord and Belmont, there is no other municipal light plant that retires a larger percentage of their energy mix than Braintree. And this is something that I think you all should be very proud of. And it's a real sign of leadership and of recognition of our accounting system in the Commonwealth. And I think, one thing that as far as where you're at, you see that Braintree is very close to meeting the renewable portfolio standards. Again, this is based on MCAN's estimates. There's a few different ways that MLPs do this. Our ways are all documented in the scorecard. But nonetheless, I think this is a real sign of leadership, and you can see they're just below the renewable portfolio standards. And so from our perspective, this is incredible. This is very, very good. And we also want to encourage you all to look at, whether or not we can retire more, whether or not that makes sense. And so as far as recommendations of this conclusion, what we're encouraging municipal light plants across the board to do is, adopt plans to strategically accelerate clean energy usage and Class 1 REC retirement. And the hope is that eventually those plans get you to a place where you're meeting or exceeding the renewable portfolio standards over time. Again, this is not legally required, but it shows continued ambition in kind of matching the rest of the state in this Class 1 REC retirement. The third conclusion that we found is that many MLPs provide a wide variety of programs that support their customers in adopting clean energy technology. That's the key, most important part. An additional component that we found is that more work is needed to ensure that all of these policies are strong and effectively incentivize a transition to a clean energy future. So here is one of the graphs that we put forward in the scorecard. And it lists a number of different programs that are available in municipal light plant. And it shows the number of municipalities or municipal light plants that are participating or have this sort of program. So you see there's a lot of engagement with the MLP Solar Rebate Program, which is it's a statewide program that MLPs can opt into. There's, almost every single municipal light plant has a net metering policy. Many provide electric vehicle charging rebates. Many I think this is very exciting. have installed or are planning to install advanced metering infrastructure, which really kind of helps with the efficiency of just the operation of the plant, and it enables efficient usage of energy. And then one thing that is we're also seeing, it's less clearly, fewer MLPs are involved in this, is a 100% clean energy opt-in program. And this is essentially where residents can choose to opt into a certain rate, and kind of by paying a little bit more, they are guaranteed that their energy is 100% renewable. And the way that it's 100% renewable is through, through that class 1 rec retirement. That's what we're seeing. And again, something that you all should be very proud of is BELD offers all of these programs, with the exception, when we were measuring this, with the exception of the 100% clean energy opt-in program. So a wide variety of programs are being provided, and I think we're seeing more and more interest from MLPs in this new, 100% clean energy opt-in. It gives residents and customers the opportunity to decide if they're willing to pay more for clean, for that 100% clean renewable energy. Now, the second piece of this conclusion is around net metering policies, is around the strength of policies. And I think one particular example that we looked at as far as, what is the strength of an MLP's net metering policy or program that supports customers in adopting clean energy, is the net metering policy. And so we didn't only say, do you have it or do you not have it? We also said, well, what are the characteristics of your particular policy? And is it the strongest it could possibly be to incentivize customers to adopt and install solar and renewable energy in their homes? And so we kind of measured 3 different things. Whether or not there was an aggregate residential capacity limit, essentially means as a municipal light plant or a community, is there a total limit that of renewable energy that will qualify, or is it just as much clean energy as residents want to see? We also looked at specific residential systems, and the goal there is, we want to make sure that the limits aren't too low, so that residents that might want to install larger solar on their homes can do that, and it will still qualify under this net metering policy. And the other thing that we looked at is whether or not the payment that customers receive when they give energy from their solar system back to the utility, whether that was equal to the energy rate that residents were being charged. And so we saw that the majority of MLPs, there was only one municipal light plant that met all 3 of these categories when looking at net metering, and that was Hull. And the majority either met 2 or 1 of these characteristics. Their net metering policies met 1 or 2 of these characteristics. And for Braintree, that is the case. We observed that there was no aggregate residential capacity limit, which is great. As far as moving forward, some potential areas that we can continue to build on is looking at whether or not it's worthwhile to strengthen net metering. And that could be done by increasing the residential capacity limit to above 10 kilowatts. That's what we were kind of measuring, as well as increasing the excess generation charge that residents receive. And I do just want to show you, so 19 MLPs kind of have a residential system capacity that is greater than 10, and 9 are providing credits that are equal to their energy rate. So, it's not a majority, but there are several MLPs that are looking at this and that do this. So that's kind of where we grounded this recommendation in. This one is something that we're just generally encouraging MLPs to do. It does not come from any particular metric, but when we think about transitioning our customers and community members to clean energy, we need to make sure that the programs, that the option to do so is not just available to the most wealthy among us. And so there might need to be additional efforts to encourage and ensure that low and moderate income residents are also a part of this transition. And that's something that we encourage all MLPs to look at. And then the final thing that the final area that you all could look at implementing is 100% clean energy opt-in program for residents. So that was conclusion 3. Conclusion 4, and this one is a little tricky, so I'll try to be as clear as I can here, but on average, the percentage of total revenue that MLPs spend on energy efficiency is approximately 1/12 of the revenue percentage that IOU investor-owned utilities allocate towards mass save. There are numerous reasons for this, which in many ways are outside of the control of municipal light plants. So the first is, I mentioned before, the Green Communities Act has very clear regulations for what how much investor-owned utilities have to spend on energy efficiency, where it goes, what percentage of it goes towards low-income residents and renters, et cetera. Those regulations and restrictions don't apply to municipal light plants. And as a result, there are many different revenue streams that are available to investor-owned utilities that are not available to municipal light plants. Nonetheless, we wanted to identify this gap because it's not just on the municipal light plant, but it may also be that the state needs to give municipal light plants more resources to implement and expand their energy efficiency programs. And so when looking at Braintree, and we looked at, this was 2020, we saw that there was somewhere around $360,000 budgeted for energy efficiency programs. And that equates to, again, using our calculations, about 0.73% of their total budget. When you look at this and you compare it to other municipal light plants, this is really good. And it shows that there is a clear commitment to energy efficiency and to energy efficiency programs. It does not mean that there isn't still room for growth. I think what we did see, so the maximum percentage that we saw came from Concord, and it's in this greater than 1% category, and I believe it was 1.8%. So among MLPs, I think Braintree is in a very strong position and has room to increase spending in energy efficiency. And the reason why we care about spending is because it has a tangible impact on the programs that are available. And so, we looked at 7 different programs. We looked at whether MLPs were offering a free energy assessment, whether they had free or they provided either free or discounted LED lights, whether they offered Energy Star rebates for various different home facilities like your refrigerator and, changing out your, I'm blanking out on a few of them, but there are plenty and plenty available, and they varied. Also, whether or not there was a rebate available for smart thermostats, things that help you to use energy efficiently, whether or not there were heat pump rebates, and then weatherization incentives or rebates. And what we saw, and then the final one I will say is whether or not an MLP had 0% energy loans available for upgrades, relating to weatherization or heat pump installation. And what we see is that, across these 5, there is high participation from municipal light plants. The vast majority provide these incentives. Weatherization is a little bit lower, but still, significant majority. And from Braintree Electric, when we were looking at them, they offer all of these programs with the exception of the 0% loan. And that can be very tricky to establish independently. For a municipal light plant to go out and create that involves cooperation with banks, and it can be very tricky. And that's why I think for us, we wanted to track this to show that this is necessary, but it's really showing the state maybe or other actors that, hey, there should be a statewide program that provides 0% interest or low interest loans for energy efficiency improvements in municipal light plants. And so based on that slide and based on the previous one, our recommendations, the areas that you could look at continuing to build on is looking at trying to increase the overall budget for energy efficiency programs to above 1%. For context, investor-owned utilities are required to use about 6.3% of their total their total revenue. Provide increased incentives for weatherization and heat pumps. I think that's something that we really want to look at. Are the heat pump incentives and the weatherization incentives, are they large enough to truly encourage the residents in Braintree to engage in these practices? And if they're not, we strongly suggest looking at increasing them. And then, implementing a 0% interest loan or advocating to the Department of Energy Resources, per se, who are looking at this very idea to establish a statewide 0% interest loan program that MLPs can join. I think that is something that we are very interested in and continue to identify ways that we can support that effort, which is very much so ongoing. Now, conclusion 5 is that more attention across municipal light plants is needed to increase access to municipal light plants' energy efficiency programs. And when we think about this, we're really thinking about access, whether or not low-income residents, communities of color, renters, language-isolated residents can participate and have the ability and capabilities to participate in energy efficiency programs at the same rate or even at an increased rate compared to other residents. And I do want to say that there are regulations and requirements that Mass Save and investor-owned utilities have to meet. All of the work here currently being done by municipal light plants is voluntary. And so that was something that we were excited to see. Is there's no requirement, but we are seeing that MLPs are engaging in these practices, and that includes Braintree. And so, we kind of looked at 3 things. We looked at whether, when we're thinking about access, whether materials are available in multiple languages, whether there are increased rebates or specific programs for low-income residents, and we allowed for some flexibility here, and also whether or not there was a targeted outreach to low-income residents or other specific communities, the elderly communities, renters. Again, we tried to be broad in our definition here, and in thinking about what we included. And I do just want to give Braintree credit. We recorded you all having been working on 2 of the 3 practices that we measured. And again, this is voluntary, so something that I think you all can be very proud of. And as you see, only 5 MLPs scored above you, so you're doing well in this area, and it's great to see that there are actions taking place. That being said, one of the things that we looked at was, targeted outreach. And that's an area where, that can be worked on. We're seeing 5 MLPs do that, and we hope to see more MLPs do that going into the future. So getting to these recommendations, I want to focus first on 2, and that's, we want to encourage MLPs and Braintree, because you all are doing the other things, to consider conducting specific outreach to low-income residents, communities of color, and others who stand to benefit the most from energy efficiency. That could be the elderly, it could be renters. The definition is very broad. And the other thing, again, this is a general thing that we're encouraging, is number one, we believe it's very important that MLPs are tracking their energy, their progress of energy efficiency programs. And the common way to do that these days is through identifying kilowatt hours saved. That's not the best way to do it. There are other interesting ideas, but nonetheless, we want to see MLPs tracking their progress and making that progress public. And we also want to encourage MLPs to be leaders here. Again, IOUs, investor-owned utilities, are not doing this, but to think about doing that in a way that allows the utility to track for equity, to understand who's benefiting from these programs, and based on that, how can we continue to build upon the progress that is being made. Conclusion 6, and I will try to go a little bit faster for these ones. Statewide programs exist that can support MLPs, but not all municipal light plant districts are taking advantage of them. And then an additional component, and something that we stress very heavily in the scorecard, is that the state, we believe, can do more to support municipal light plants in areas of energy transition and energy efficiency. And all of that is to say there are programs available, and we encourage MLPs to engage in those programs, but there is more that we believe the state can do to support municipal light plants, both financially and technically. And so just looking at the programs available, we obviously have the Green Communities designation. We also have something called a Renewable Energy Trust Fund, which essentially you have to opt into. And the challenging part is that once you opt in, you cannot leave. That's a barrier that I wish the state would get rid of. But opting into that program, you are given access to numerous different financial resources and programs provided by an organization called Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And they have some very incredible, innovative programs and funding opportunities. And so that's a program that we do support and think MLPs could stand to benefit from opting in. It does entail a fee, and I think that is one of the drawbacks. And similarly, there's this new program offered by Mass Development called the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. We believe that this has the potential to be a game changer when we're thinking about financing clean energy projects and energy efficiency projects for large commercial customers and for multifamily housing units. It's something that is not through the MLP, it's through the town, and the town can choose to opt into it. And it's something that we believe is very exciting and has a huge amount of potential. And so as we spoke about, Braintree has joined the Green Communities designation. They have not joined the Renewable Energy Trust Fund and the PACE program, which I will say is very new. So only 6 MLPs have joined that. And so when we think about recommendations, those are 2 areas that you all might look at and say, hey, this is worthwhile and this is interesting for our community. The final conclusion that we drew, and this is very much so a general one, is that justice and equity in the energy sector need to be at the center of MLP policy, programs, and operations. And this is by no means specific to Braintree. This, we believe, applies across the board. And, you know, it's really about the fact that things like investing in energy infrastructure, implementing policies, and developing programs for ratepayers, all of that, all of the things that an MLP does, it has the potential to either exacerbate or alleviate existing injustices in MLP territories and across the Commonwealth. And so, you know, from our standpoint, we need to acknowledge, you know, what's been done. We haven't been focusing on this as much as we feel we should be. And similarly, we feel that more of a conversation about this needs to be had, and that more work needs to be done across the board to center justice in policy making, decision making at the municipal light plant level. And when we're talking about advocacy and MLP, you know, and residents advocating for change. And I wanted to just emphasize, I think specifically for climate mitigation policies, you know, climate change is likely going to disproportionately harm, you know, lower income residents, communities of color, you know, these already vulnerable populations. And so when we're thinking about climate mitigation, thinking about how equity relates to that and how these policies will affect, you know, the most vulnerable among our communities is really, really important, we believe. So that's the conclusions. And I will just say, as far as next steps, there's a lot of information that I presented. I saw a few things happening in the chat, so I'm happy to take questions here, but I do encourage folks to go look at the scorecard. There's an abundance of information, you know, some of which I just wasn't able to get in and discuss here, and a lot that can be learned about the state of municipal light plants and how we move forward. And the other thing I will say is we've been putting together 2-pagers that kind of reflect some of the information that I presented today and some directions that specific municipal light plants can take. And so I have sent one over to Michael for Braintree, and it's not by any means as formal as the scorecard, but we just hope that it's a useful resource, and we hope that it helps to increase collaboration and continue moving forward in this, you know, challenge that we all have to work together to address of the climate crisis and transitioning to a just and clean energy future. And with that, if we have time for questions, I am happy to take a few questions.
Take a few. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. I posted the link to the scorecard in the chat box. Can you talk a little bit for review? What does green community mean? And what is Braintree doing in regard to this? And maybe you don't know the Braintree part, and we can pull somebody else in that, but give us a review of what the green community means.
Yeah, so the Green Communities Program is a wonderful program, as I mentioned, established back in 2008. And essentially, it's a program that communities choose to opt into. And in order to opt into them, they need to satisfy a few key criteria. And I wish I knew them off the top of my head. I think one of them is you have to adopt a building code, an energy efficient building code. You need to set specific standards or specific targets as far as emissions reductions in your community, and identify how you're going to get there. And there's a few others. And so once you receive that designation, you are then eligible for funding, for various different funding opportunities for, I believe, clean energy efficiency projects. That it might be more broad than that. So that's kind of the benefit. You get the carrot of, you know, increased funding opportunities. I am not entirely sure what Braintree is working on, but I will just say just the fact of receiving that designation in and of itself, because you have to meet that criteria, that is all, you know, very much so progress in the right direction.
Outstanding. Maybe our president, Mike, if you want to weigh in on what Braintree is doing in regard to this, you might know more than myself. And Mike, you could put that directly in the chat box for us. My next question is, does MCAN have any ideas or examples about how Braintree might be able to tie our green community status and the grants that come with it to some of the recommendations that the report has made?
That is a great question. I don't know that I have a good like direct answer as far as this is the exact program. What I will just highlight is, a lot of the things that we put forward, and we acknowledge this, very openly, it requires increased resources. And so when you think about priorities and things, various different actions that you want to take, funding always is an important question. And so looking towards the Green Communities program to see whether or not a program or a certain idea that the community is collectively interested in would apply for funding, and then applying for that funding is a wonderful, kind of a wonderful way to utilize that Green Communities program. And I will say, some communities have received pretty large and substantial grants through that program. We wish, and we have actually been advocating for additional resources from the state to go into that fund, because there is at this point such a high demand for those resources. But nonetheless, there are currently funds available and that you can take advantage of.
And what communities, I know that you mentioned that there are 4 of them, but do you remember off the top of your head, which are the communities that are doing 100% opt-in clean energy? That's a very high standard to meet. Quite impressive those 4 are doing it.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, this is not the entire MLP doing 100% renewable. Rather, they are offering an option for their residents to opt in and essentially have 100% of their residents' energy be covered by clean renewable energy, typically in the form of rec retirement. I don't have the full list, so there are 6 of them. I know that among them is Concord, Wellesley, Belmont. Actually, maybe not Concord. See, so maybe I shouldn't go off of this. I do know that Belmont and Wellesley are among those that have implemented these programs. And what I will say is something that we observed through our survey is that there is quite a bit of interest. I know Holyoke was looking into it, and various different other communities that had not yet adopted it were looking into it. I think there is growing interest in this idea because, again, it's all about community choice. If you want to pay extra for that to be 100% renewable, then you have that option. And I think that that's very attractive for many municipal light plants.
But there's a green premium on that. Very difficult to achieve. So with that, I don't see any more questions. So I'm just going to give you a round of applause because it was a wonderful presentation. I myself learned a lot.
Yeah.
We thank you very much for your time today.
And likewise, I would just love to give a round of applause to you all and to the staff and municipal leaders who are on the call. I think that Braintree is really in a very strong position and leading in a lot of ways. And so huge kudos to you all for making that happen.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's the president of Sustainable Braintree. And that concludes our formal presentation from NCAM. So I'm going to stop the recording at this time because we're going to move into official Sustainable Braintree business.